Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast. I am Mario Sikora here with my co-hosts TJ Dawe and TJ Ingrassia. And folks, you think it would be easy to tell these guys apart, but they're the same height, they're both skinny, they're both handsome, and they both got the same freaking first name. So this makes my life difficult. Anyway, we're going to talk about a movie that demonstrates the preserving seven. And the movie we're going to talk about is Marie Antoinette, starring Kirsten Dunst and written and directed by Sofia Coppola. TJ Ingrassia, you recommended this movie for the preserving seven. Tell us why.
Well, I used it as the preserving seven example in a video that I made a couple years ago, and I was pleasantly surprised that you guys both accepted it as a preserving seven movie. And I think it's a really interesting contrast to the other seven films that we've done in some big ways, with the transmitting seven, Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey, and then also with Pride and Prejudice. There's some similar, it's around similar kinds of eras. European sensibilities, but very big differences in terms of the styles that are coming through. So I love this film. Think it's a great movie by itself, but I think it's a good example for us to talk about.
Yeah, and I'll admit I was reluctant to do this, and for a couple of reasons. I'm not huge. I'm not a huge period piece person, which I think we've established, and also, look, I'll be honest, I'm fairly literate when it comes to history, but I don't know a huge amount of Marie Antoinette, and I think I have the same knee-jerk assumption that everybody else does, that she was not a very particularly, likable character. And you both assured me that she comes across as much more likable in this movie and much more approachable and forgivable, which I found to absolutely be the case. So I really enjoyed this movie and didn't even mind watching it twice in preparation for the podcast. So let's get into it. And TJ Dawe, why don't you give us a synopsis of the movie?
You bet. So we meet Marie Antoinette as a teenager. She's played by Kirsten Dunst. She's part of the Austrian royal family, and she's soon married off to the Prince of France, the Dauphin, as they call him, Louis XVI, played by Jason Schwartzman. She moves into the Palace of Versailles. She has many attendants, and everyone is strongly invested in her producing numerous heirs. She quickly discovers her husband has no interest whatsoever in sex, including consummating the marriage. So she spends her time enjoying herself with her friends until eventually, he does consummate the marriage. She gets pregnant. She gives birth. Years pass, she has two more children, one of whom is very probably fathered by a Swedish nobleman. And then her husband inherits the throne when his father dies. One of their children dies. And eventually they're advised to leave the palace and seek refuge in the country because the peasants are revolting, but they stay. And then the mob traps them in the palace, and even though we don't see it, they're eventually brought to Paris and executed, and the palace is trashed, and roll credits.
Yeah, so let's see. Like I said, I liked the movie. I thought it was a very sympathetic portrayal of the character, and I did a little bit of reading after watching the movie, and it probably was right. I mean, a lot of the hype around Marie Antoinette, or a lot of the reputation, is probably not based on fact, but just how she was perceived by people. The whole let them eat cake thing, we don't know if she ever really said that. Probably not. But I found it. I found her to be an interesting character, and I really thought that Sofia Coppola brought a creative approach to this movie. And I want to take a few minutes talking about that. So if we look at it in terms of filmmaking, what insights, what reactions do either of you have as far as the style is concerned, let's say?
Well, I think it's sort of a blending of old and new, you might say. Apparently, they had a lot of access. They filmed it at Versailles and a lot of locations around there. And so some of those rooms that they're filming in, it's just like it's overload with the floral patterns and the pillows and the gilding, and it's too much. These people, it's just too much gold. French people, but she's using Sofia Coppola's using post-punk, new wave music, modern music. There's one of the shots. There's a scene where Marie's trying on shoes, and you can see there's a pair of baby blue Chucks in the background.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Just
that's great. That's great.
Complete free license. This is not meant to be a historical documentary.
Right.
It's whatever. Generally tracks with the life of Marie Antoinette, but lots of artistic license.
Yeah.
And it just feels modern and fresh. And this is a great example. I'm not super well versed in the canon of Sofia Coppola, but I know she's had some really great films, and she's had a lot of stinkers.
Yeah.
And this is peak Sofia Coppola. In fact, so the Big Picture podcast that we're big fans of, the Ringer Network, they recently did a 25 for 25, the best 25 movies of the last 25 years, and this was number 10 on their list. And
really?
Their top pick for Sofia Coppola. And I agree.
I'm still partial to Lost in Translation. I think that movie for me will always have kind of a special place in my heart. But I avoided this movie. I not kind of consciously, but just never found any interest, in seeing it. But again, I'm really glad I did. TJ Dawe, your reaction to the movie?
Yeah, just to build on what you were saying about the music, there's a few other movies that come to mind in terms of they're very much set in a period in the past and use modern music. One of them is Sinners, which is a big Oscar nominee this year. I win. By the time this comes out, we'll know.
Should win, as far as I'm
concerned.
Great
film, yeah. And then The Great Gatsby, the Baz Luhrmann version of The Great Gatsby that came out in 2013. There's all these scenes of these lavish parties that Jay Gatsby is throwing, but the music is very modern. It's hip hop. And I like that choice. Like, I can see how that might bother some people, but I think it's just a good way of bringing us into what it was like to experience that music at that time, rather than it seeming like something stiff and ancient and formal, which they also use classical music from the period in Marie Antoinette. Right. But it's like it's hard for us now to experience what that was like for them. And using modern music is one of the ways of doing that. So I really like that. I thought that was a good choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought so too. I mean, first of all, it was some really interesting music choices too, right? I mean, I liked the music that she was using. I again, with Lost in Translation, I think has a great soundtrack as well, a very interesting and creative soundtrack. And I just thought it was some really interesting needle drops that happened. Like I forget what scene it is, but there's a clip of I think it was The Cure's Disintegration. And again, it was just like 15 seconds of the instrumental part of the song, but really, really effective. And I think what it did was serve to connect us to the characters, right? Because it would be easy to seem so remote, so distant from, a story taking place in the 1760s. But this, I think, helped to bridge the connection of the human experience, in a sense, right? To what the characters were experiencing, even though, I mean, quite frankly, it was a lavishness and a luxury that, I don't think I'll ever experience. I don't know about you guys, but I've yet to have, a whole court of fully made up and dressed people, waiting for me when I wake up in the morning, right? So
you'll get there eventually.
Yeah, eventually.
And one other thing in terms of just how I felt connected to the film is that I like that they completely dispense with the pretense of everyone's going to do a French accent. So yes. Kirsten Dunst sounds like an American. Tom Hardy sounds like a Brit. We're all pretending that we're French, but everyone just gets to be themselves.
Yeah.
And it just sort of, you just get to put that part of your brain aside and just enjoy the film.
Yeah. And every once in a while, somebody would speak in French, right? And there would be subtitles, and you're like, what?
So French exists, and you're not speaking it the rest of the time? Like, is this German ostensibly that you're speaking? Yeah. I
thought that Jason Schwartzman was the one who just really stood out as his just being so non-French in his demeanor. And I loved the choice of Rip Torn as the king.
Just absolutely going for it.
Wow. And and Molly Shannon thrown in there, and just these different things. But the Rip Torn character, just fantastic.
It's a lot of actors that you don't normally see in period pieces. And no slight to their performances or the movie itself, they didn't really seem like they were from that period. I think that's what the goal was. That's why you cast Jason Schwartzman. That's why you cast Rip Torn.
Yes.
There are some actors like Russell Crowe, for instance, who just can neatly slide into any period, whether it's the 80s or ancient Rome, and you believe it. And there's some actors that you just don't. Put them in a period, and it seems like they're wearing a Halloween costume.
Yeah, like Rip Torn.
Yeah.
So it's one of my favorites, by the way. I just love Rip Torn.
Surprise.
I don't know if you guys I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie Extreme Prejudice with him and Nick Nolte and Powers Booth from the early 80s. It's kind of a Sam Peckinpah ripoff, of the Wild Bunch in a way. But Rip Torn is just over the top Rip Tornish, and Powers Booth just chews up the scenery, and Nick Nolte just growls through the whole thing. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, fantastic movie if you can find it. So, all right, so let's get into the Enneagram related stuff here. So we identified this movie as a preserving 7 character, and we typically start off with what is the type here. So what is 7-ish about Marie Antoinette? Who wants to start us off?
Pleasure seeking is my one heading. So the very first moment that we see her, she's languishing in a chaise longue, and a maid is putting on her shoes, and she takes a fingerful of icing from a nearby cake. So that is pretty good condensation of 7. It's like life is a buffet of pleasures. I want them all. And when I have them, delicious.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Good. For sure. And pleasure is throughout this movie. Absolutely. TJ Ingrassia, how about you? What struck you as 7-ish?
It's the striving to feel excited. It's her similar to Harley Quinn in the sense of this irrepressible optimism. She's thrown into this new environment she's unfamiliar with. All of her things and her friends and her dog are left behind, and she's thrown into this new world that's very antagonistic towards her for the most part. But she's generally smiling. She's generally finding wonder in the things around her, her accommodations, the food, the experiences that she has. And so, and we're going to get more into this, I'm sure, but there's a preserving element that tones it down, obviously, compared to Harley Quinn. But yeah, overall, she's striving to feel excited at bottom.
Yeah. There's a, let's see, I want to call it a hedonism, but that brings a negative connotation, right? Which I want to be careful about, because I did not see her. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to talk about when we get to the preserving 7 elements of this is she really is kind of a sweet and caring person. Right? She really wants to do right. She wants to please people. She wants to help. And is one of the reasons why preserving 7s can often look 2-ish. So that people understand what the storyline is that she is a member of the Austrian royalty who is married into the French royalty when I think she was about 14 or 15, right? She was very young.
Yeah, she was 14. Louis was 16.
No, there you go. So, no wonder it took them a while to. Anyway, so.
Or the opposite.
Well, this is true, yeah, and he was much more interested in locks than he was in.
Well, we'll get to that when we talk about Louis, I'm sure. But so, just to digress on that for just a second, Jason Schwartzman does such a great job of portraying a clueless, terrified little boy who's thrown into this situation and has no idea what to do with this girl, and she's not even a woman.
Right, and that's so even though she was young. Or she was young when it starts off. She has to give up everything, right? She has to, literally, when she crosses over
clothes off of
into
her back.
France. The clothes off her back. They say you can bring nothing of your old life with you, including her beloved dog, and and so she's really starting afresh. And you can see her vacillating back and forth between excitement over the adventure of this and terror of what it must have been like at 14 to give up everything to be married off to somebody in a different country and have to have the weight of peace between these two countries resting on your shoulders to keep your husband satisfied and have babies, right? But she and you see these moments in her when she does kind of feel the terror and feel the fear, but she bounces back really well. Right. And this is a gift that sevens have, right? They can get knocked down and they can bounce back up and look for the bright side of things. And I think we see this throughout with Marie Antoinette.
Resilience.
Yes, for sure. So anything else seven-ish?
There's just a minor moment where she's in church during Mass and she notices an old woman falling asleep in her seat. And she nudges her friend and they snicker quietly. And that struck me as just, you don't have to be a 7 to find that funny. But just of all the moments in this character's life you could have included in this 2-hour movie, just to show that. And it reminds me of something Richard Rohr mentioned in his book on the Enneagram, A Christian Perspective, about how often priests from Ireland are sevens and how Ireland is a sevenish culture in general. And how often in the middle of a lecture or a Mass, he'll see the Irish priests elbowing each other and sharing quiet jokes and snickering of it just happens again and again and again. It reminded me of that.
Yeah. So that says a couple of things to me, right? Number one, it's humor, right? So an inclination toward humor, but also getting bored easily, right? And looking around and looking for stimulation. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to this boring, priest talking about whatever. And so I'm looking around for something that's entertaining. And then I want to share that with the person next to me because that kind of doubles the fun, right? It's one thing for me to experience. It's another thing for us to experience this together, which is why, and again, this is something we'll see, particularly with the preserving sevens, is they want to enjoy things with the people that are close to them. Whereas a transmitting seven might want to be more inclined to entertain other people. Right. A navigating seven, will also be more sort of, connected to the other. But the preserving seven really wants that fellow traveler with them, that person who's experiencing this thing at the same time that they are, and we're connected by that shared experience. Other thoughts on the sevenness in this movie?
My list of preserving stuff is much longer than my list of seven stuff.
I was going to say that there's a lot to talk about with preserving here, and a lot to talk about with preserving seven. So, and again, this is where we start to see these subtypes express themselves differently. So there's not a whole lot in this movie that is expressly seven.
Yeah, I think maybe the most seven-ish scene is the I want candy scene.
Yes.
When she's tearing through all the food and the chocolates and the boxes and the shoes and the dresses and the hair that's 3 feet tall.
Yes.
Which is a really fun seven-ish sort of a scene. And that gets probably at the most heart of it in this film, I would say.
Yeah, and even that is preserving seven, right? And because it's all about, these things. And I don't want to jump us too far ahead here, but this whole idea of the nest and the things in it and the things that bring me simple pleasures is really what the preserving seven is all about. And they can seem engaging and outgoing and expressive, but they're really shy people typically, who just kind of want to be safe in their nest and protected and experience things and be safe and comfortable and have fun while doing it. Yeah. So I'll just say one more thing that, and it's not so much the character, but if we think of seven as gluttony, pretty much every shot of Versailles is, is kind of sevenish in that way, because boy, oh boy, was it, to your earlier point, TJ, really, really overdone. All right. Okay.
Lavish to the point that it's kind of normalized and stops meaning anything, which I think is also
Yes.
a reflection of a certain element of sevenness. Is like to have everything is not that different from having nothing. Like it stops feeling special.
Yeah, and she falls in love with her little village place, right? The little getaway, compared to Versailles, her cottage, right? Where she can just wear simple clothes and, enjoy the simple pleasures of, milking goats and getting eggs from the chicken coop and that sort of thing. So, so good. So let's move into the preserving stuff. So what jumps out here? Tell you what, I'm going to start with TJ Dawe. TJ, what jumps out as preserving?
Well, this is specific to your take on the Enneagram and the subtypes. Traditions as a big preserving thing. This movie's full of traditions. It involves the royal family. It involves the church. So there's a lot of codified, formal traditions and procedures and protocols, like when she's meeting the king or when she's getting dressed, or others' worries about the precarious nature of her position, the coronation. We see the ceremony, all this. We see the wedding. It's like, here's how things are done. Here's how they have been done from time immemorial, and we will do them as scripted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was so much ritual in this movie. I mean, every day starts with a ritual early in the morning, right? They would open up the curtains, and there are all these people in there, and there's strict protocols over who in the room gets attention, depending on where they are and their status and so forth. So, which also, there's a lot of navigating stuff in this movie as well, right? And
which she is completely lost and oblivious to.
It's well, so I'm not going to say completely oblivious to, right? Because there are times when she engages with it a little bit, right? But she has limited tolerance for it, okay? And gets bored with it. And I think this, again, is the preserving zone of inner conflict, right? Yeah, I want some of it because, look, I need to know what's going on, and I need to be connected enough so that I'm safe. But really not that interested in it.
There's that scene with the king's courtesan and just the understanding, which is blatantly discussed, of like, she can't talk to me first. I have to talk to her first. And you really should do that to show that you approve of her. And she's reluctant to do it, but then she does it. And it's very perfunctory. She says, the most perfunctory statement possible. There are many people at Versailles today. And within the subtext is very clear, is I'm throwing you a bone. We are not friends. I do not particularly care for you. I am going through the motions of this. And the woman receives it with a smile. Thank you for doing that. And then now we don't have to ever speak again.
Yes.
Yeah, as she walks away, she says, that's the last words I'll ever speak to that woman.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I've got a list of some preserving things here. TJ, Ingrassia, anything jump out to you as preserving?
Well, so I think it's helpful in some ways to compare and contrast this to the other 2 7 films that we've done. So I'm going to try. I think it makes sense in my head. I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. In the first 10-ish or so minutes of this film, she says virtually nothing. Yeah. We're just watching her as she's experiencing these things that are happening to her. If you watch the first 10 minutes of Birds of Prey, Harley Quinn says more words in the first 10 minutes than Marie Antoinette says in the entire film.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in there in terms of the transmitting versus the preserving difference.
Yes.
That she doesn't have to speak. It's more of there's more of an observational thing. She's taking it in. She doesn't have to transmit herself out. She's comfortable in her nest, and that's good enough for her.
Yeah.
So that was the first big one that jumped out to me. And then just the preserving versus navigating differences. Pride and Prejudice is sort of a similar, relatively similar period piece that's all about navigating, and it's how these different women are navigating this environment. And in general, it's people who are navigating very well, Mrs. Bennet and Elizabeth, and they're figuring out this world. Whereas the Marie Antoinette preserving character is having difficulties with the navigating that's going around her in the court and all that. So I think those two things sort of help highlight the differences of what the Preserving 7 character looks like versus the other two.
Yeah. It's hard not to go into the Preserving 7 piece of this, right? So, but before we do that, there's just a couple of things. TJ, you already mentioned the traditions. I wrote, that the traditions abound. Even the dancing is kind of ritualistic and methodical and impersonal in a way. And I know that was the norm of the time, but still it was, just very, very structured. Now there was the costume party was a different experience that was much more vivid, but I'm thinking of the early dance scenes. Let's see here. The carriage I found interesting. The carriage ride in the very beginning, it was kind of like this traveling cocoon, and you could see her doing the things that preservers would do. Like there were times when they were eating, they would play games, they would do all these things, but it just kind of reflected this little home away from home in a way that I thought was interesting. A lot about food throughout this, right? I mean, food is all over the place and the way they're served. And it was, you didn't see, at least in their formal meals, you didn't see her particularly taking pleasure and joy in the food, right? A lot of it felt like I'm just doing this as part of the ritual. But there were other scenes, and the opening that you pointed out, TJ, was kind of decadent, right? And enjoying the food. And so, again, I see this with preservers. There's this, okay, I've got to eat to live, so I'm going to eat. And then, you know what, got to eat to really live too. So they'll go back and forth between feeling conflicted about food and then really diving in at times. Huge things about loyalty in this movie too. Huge conflict, even at the end where she says, I'm not going to leave my husband, right? She knows she's going to be beheaded. She could get away, but she has that loyalty where she wants to stay. And again, it's a preserving thing. Preservers do have this thing around connection to the tight-knit group and or the significant other that's really critical to them. Okay. All right, so we can move on to the Preserving 7 now. TJ,
one more thing to mention. We've already kind of covered this, but just wanted to underline domesticity and creature comforts. It's a very preserving thing. Yeah. So we mentioned how lavish the palace is and the elaborate bed in the bedroom. There's a secret bedroom off the main bedroom, which is a little less formal and just feels more comfortable. Yes. There's also, as we mentioned, food and clothes and shoes, decorations, candles, candelabra. Like, there's a lot of room in the movie to notice, like, what the preserving elements of this world is like. And it's hand in hand with something I said in the episode on Pride and Prejudice about period pieces having an intrinsic navigating theme in them. They also have an intrinsic preserving thing in them, because you can't not watch them without at least some attention to how were those elements of life different in that time and place. Like, what did they eat? How did they dress? How often did they wash? Was food served to them? Did they get it for themselves? How did they bathe? What's their grooming routine? Where do they go to the bathroom? Not that they covered that in this movie, but it's like these different preserving elements were different.
But she did bathe with a gown on, right? There's a scene where she gets out of the bathtub and she's wearing a gown.
And my partner, being a preserver, she doesn't love period movies pre-20th century, but something that she discovered when we started going out and I would show her old movies is anything that was contemporary but filmed in, say, the 40s or the 30s or the 50s. Her eye went right to, how is that apartment furnished? What do the water glasses look like on the table? How is that person dressed? All of there's this extra layer of enjoyment that she gets from old movies simply because of her interest in all things preserving.
Yeah. And it's interesting. One would be hard pressed to find a more opulent place than Versailles. Okay. And yet her attitude toward it, now she was a person of comfort anyway. I mean, she was royalty herself, but there were not moments of, wow, look at this. right? In fact, it was the quieter moments, the watching the sunrise, and the little things like that were emphasized. And even though the camera panned the opulence, it was almost panning for orientation rather than panning for wow, I felt, right? Whereas if this was a transmitting movie, it would have been all about the wow, right? All about, look at these chandeliers sort of things. Look at this bedspread, all these sort of things. So very different attitude. All right, so let's go to preserving 7. Now, the preserving 7, somebody who's striving to feel excited and preserving, and they tend to, so there's an interesting dynamic with preserving 7s. Socially, when you are engaged with them, they seem much more outgoing and expressive than they are. So they might seem like extroverts, they might look like transmitters, but you will start to notice that they start looking for excuses to leave pretty quickly, right? They start looking for excuses to go back to the nest. It takes a lot of energy for them to transmit, and because they want to please and because they're 7s, they can look a little bit transmitting at times and they can look expressive and outgoing, but they're really not, right? They tend to be homebodies. They tend to be much more introverted. And again, we see this with Marie Antoinette. So thoughts on that note, guys? Well,
one thing that's coming to mind is actually a shining exception to that, which is the masked ball, where she wants to stay as long as possible. And it's her husband that wants to go home, and he mentions that it's 3 a.m, and she's disappointed that they go back. But by and large, so much of the movie is her just delighting in creature comforts and luxuries in the palace, either by herself or with her close friends.
Yeah. TJ, anything from you?
So I pulled this quote from Instinctual Leadership, which is a great book that I recommend, talking about the preserving 7s. They can vacillate back and forth between exuberant positivity and frustration at an unexpected discomfort or disappointment at not being as satisfied as they expected to be. And this film is filled with this tension of her, literally not being as satisfied as she expected to be. She's not connecting with her husband. And so she turns deeper and deeper into the champagne towers and boxes of candy and food and shoes and parties. And so there is this tension between, she's in this place that's unfamiliar. It's a pretty hostile environment. She's not satisfied in those ways, and so she finds other ways and bounces back and enjoys other things in those ways.
Yeah.
But then, I don't know if we want to get into this now or where's a good place to talk about it, but I thought it was interesting as the film developed. She does have she sort of gets more serious as she goes on. She loses a child. She's wearing black. Obviously she's maturing. The film, Kirsten Dunst looks more or less the same, but she's aged, 15 years or so throughout the course of the film. And it seems like there's, as she ages, there's less of a, she's not continuing to open boxes of new shoes every day. And that part of her life seems to recede a bit as she gets older.
Yeah. And I do think that's partly natural maturity, right? I mean, she starts out as, a young girl, frankly, and there is that kind of childlike exuberance that we see there. And I think you see that in 7s even more than most children, right? So my 2 sons who are 7s, it was the same way. They were just exuberant boys when they were little, and they start to mature as they go, and they start to settle down a bit. And yet, and it starts to take a different shape, I think. And also, she had some tragedy, and she had some, not an easy life. I mean, it would look like an easy life, to your point earlier, TJ, you're getting everything you want, right? I'm going to buy you a small chateau to be your own little dollhouse, almost, right? And yet it's like, it's not satisfying, right?
The note that I wrote down is she's trapped in a golden prison. Yeah. So there is this sense that she's enjoying these things, but it's not. It's like she's oppressed almost by this castle that she's stuck in.
Yes. And there is a tendency that sevens have to think of what could be better. And we see this in her, this Swedish count is something that could be better, right? And she's having these fantasies of him. And so there's often in sevens this longing quality that they keep hidden, but is there and takes over more and more if they're not able to find a way to find true contentment rather than just consistent stimulation. It's kind of the what is it, the hedonic ladder, I think, or treadmill, right? The hedonic treadmill where you just have to, if you're living because of pleasure, you just have to keep going, right? You have to keep going and going and going. And it's until you learn to seek contentment and fulfillment rather than just pleasure that you do need to keep up this treadmill. But as you start to mature and realize, savoring and contentment is what I'm looking for here, that you can start to mature and slow down.
All of this is reminding me of something that has nothing to do with the movie, but very much related to this theme, which is that we now live in an age of streaming music sites. And that's where the vast majority of people get their music. And I'm of a generation where, as I was growing up, if you wanted music, it was either on the radio or you bought it.
Yes.
And as a kid, you didn't have that much money. Most of us didn't anyway. I didn't. So you really were intentional with your music purchases. And I did a lot of browsing compared to how little buying I did. So there's a lot of anticipation. And then once you bring the tape or the CD or the record home, then it's like, okay, I plunked down what little money I have on this. I want to get my money's worth out of it. So if the album doesn't thrill you right away, well, I'll listen to it a number of more times because I'd only have so much. And then quite often what would happen is an album would grow on me and it would become one of my favorites, even though initially I might have just been lukewarm for it. Now you have everything at the press of a button for practically free. And something I don't know if there's any way of actually discerning is, do we have more music lovers today than we did 20 or 30 or 50 years ago? Like in terms of people who are passionate audiophiles, because everything is available, any genre, any time period, any artist at the click of a button? Or is it, like I was saying before, not that different from having nothing, where it's like, yeah, I could listen to that. Yeah, I'm bored. Next. I don't really care.
That's an excellent point. And I'll come back to the music part of it in a moment because it's really interesting. But if you think about what is the happiest time in her life, it's when she's at the cottage, right? It's when she doesn't have those creature comforts. And she tells them, no, make me clothes that are comfortable. And so she's just wearing these comfortable white dresses rather than the, dresses of the court that she has to wear all the time. And she's laying in the grass. And she's feeding the little lamb and, all these little things, getting chickens with her, or getting eggs out of the chicken coop with her daughter. So all these simple pleasures that she is savoring. And so, in our approach, the accelerator for the type 7, the thing that helps them grow is to learn to savor things instead of seeking stimulation all the time, but to be with something, to enjoy the sunrise, to feel the grass underneath you and the sun on your face, to, pet the lamb, whatever it is. And that's what she is experiencing there. And to your point, TJ, it's where she doesn't have everything that she could possibly want at her disposal.
Brought to her. Done for her.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah. Back to the music thing, it's a really, really interesting point. So I do think there are still people who are, kind of music heads, but it does feel different, right? I remember, as a kid, and I'm older than both of you, where there would be certain songs when you would hear them on the radio, it was a big deal. Oh man, they're playing Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. Everybody shut up, kind of thing, right? Because you'd hear it like 3 times a year, maybe, if that. And now there's everything. And so a quick little aside here. So back when I had albums, I am from the vinyl era. And one of my albums I had that was one of my favorites was a duet, a compilation, or not a compilation, collaboration between Jimmy Witherspoon, the blues vocalist, and Ben Webster, the jazz saxophone player. And it was just called Jimmy Witherspoon and Ben Webster. And it was just always one of my favorite albums. And when I gave all my albums away, that was one of them. And then I when I went to look for it on Spotify, it was nowhere to be found. I could not find that album anywhere. I couldn't find it, on Amazon, all these sort of things. And I hunted for years. And I finally came across a resale copy of it that I bought as an LP. And I don't have a turntable, so I haven't listened to it, but I've got it. And now I feel good, right? So I can move on to the next thing. But to that point is when I didn't have it, it's all I could think about. Not all I could think about, obviously, but I thought about it a lot and I desperately wanted it. And then, I got it now. What's next? Yeah, interesting point. Not just for sevens, but a 7-ish issue for sure.
And the internet is very 7-ish in terms of like, as Bo Burnham put it, a little bit of everything all of the time. Like all the music you want, it's there. Any movie ever made? Yeah. Sure. Just find it. Any rabbit hole you want to go down, go right ahead.
Yeah.
And what does it mean?
Yeah.
And then does it really make us happier? How many people would say that the internet has made them happier and feel more fulfilled?
Yeah. And how many people, other than TJ Dawe, struggle to read books now, right? TJ has always got his book list, But I mean, I find it really difficult to read books anymore. I hate to say it, but to sit down with a book and really read through it is way more of a challenge than it used to be. Because of the short.
That's why I do audiobooks. I can read while I'm doing the dishes, while I'm driving. It's not the same experience, though.
Right. But it does count. Right. A lot of people give themselves shit for listening to audiobooks. Like it's not actually reading. It is.
Yeah. Look, whatever way you can get it, that's great. All right, so let's go back to the Preserving 7. Okay, so the Preserving 7, again, a different kind of character, certainly than the Transmitting 7, but also because of the Navigating 7. And again, this, for me, this movie, I struggled to see 7. I struggled to see Preserving, but I saw Preserving 7 all over it. And part of it is because I'm married to a Preserving 7, and my wife was I could just see my wife in that, dressed up like that character and living that kind of life, with all the kind of, childlike pleasures and frustrations and all these other sort of things. So there are so many areas here in which she is sharing her pleasures with the people she cares about, right? It's not just I am indulging, but I want to indulge in this with you, the people that matter to her, okay? Particularly around her children, her friends, and so forth. So,
A moment that builds on that is when she goes to the opera in Paris and she applauds and she's told it's not customary to applaud at a royal performance, but she keeps on applauding and everybody looks and eventually she ignites the entire audience. Suddenly everybody's applauding. It's like, why shouldn't we all take delight in this great thing that we just saw? It was wonderful.
Yes.
Hooray. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Another thing that was very Preserving 7, we've touched on this already, was that the home that her husband bought her for her little getaway, and she even said, I don't know if I can find it here real quick. Oh no, I'll come back to that other thing. But she said that this is something along the lines of, this is my happy place. This is where I'm most content. And so it really was, this is my nest. It was a big nest, but it was a nest nonetheless, right? I can just relax here. I can enjoy the simple pleasures. I can keep myself busy. I can be me, and I don't have to worry about other people and what they think and what they're saying and what they're doing and what their expectations of me are, because I can just be left alone. Anything else Preserving 7 to you guys?
There is one brief scene where she's taking a walk and she discusses her plans to plant oaks along these paths, and she's asking the advisor how long that would take and how much would it cost and that kind of thing. And 2 weeks, but they would be quite small. Well, what if I wanted them that size? Well, that would take at least 3 years. Can't they bring in bigger ones? I can see. And then has to contend with you'll have to spend $50,000 this month and there's nothing more for your charities. So she says, I'll get the small trees. I'll ask Louis for the money for the mother's fund. But it's like, that's one preserving impulse competing versus another. Like, I want to beautify this area in a way that's pleasing to me, and having a preserving partner myself, like that's very much on her mind of like, how can I feather the nest in a way that I really like, versus how much money do I have to spend? And the tension between that is, do I save money or do I spend it on some delightful preserving thing?
There was another part in there that I think is important, and again, a very preserving thing. We've talked about in the preserving episodes how sevens tend to be pleasers, but the preserving seven in particular is a pleaser. And as we've touched on, one of the big challenges was that she was not getting pregnant, and there was starting to be real concern there that she would be rejected, right? That, she would end up being cast aside in terms of, in favor of someone who could get pregnant. And so that bothered her, but there was a line in there, and I think it was when her brother was talking to her, and she says, "Letting everyone down would be my greatest unhappiness." Right? And people always ask me, what is the difference between a 7 and a 2? And we might have even touched on this before, but the 2 wants to connect to people, and so they want to please people so that we will be connected. The 7 wants to please people so that I can be happy, right? If you are happy, I am happy. And I think that scene and that sentence just encapsulated that thing so well. It really jumped out to me. Mm-hmm.
Just to jump back to something you said a moment ago, Mario, imagining your wife in this role in this movie. Something that I do reasonably frequently while watching a movie, if I'm trying to discern a character's type, is copy and paste in either a person from my life that I know is a given type, or a character from a movie, or an actor that I'm pretty sure is that type. And kind of imagine, okay, if they were in this role, would it be different? Or would they cleanly embody that same energy? Would it really impact the movie little, if at all?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, and for me, that is the sign of a well done portrayal of a particular Enneagram type. And, and most people, David Fincher aside, most people, when they're making a movie, are not saying, okay, this character is this type and you got to be this, and I've got to hire an actor who's that type and so forth. But it's really magical when the script, the director's vision, and the actor all come together and portray, the type in this with the same mindset, right? And you get these sort of unforgettable characters, right? So John Wayne, for example, right? I mean, most of his movies were directed by John Ford. An 8, from, what I could tell from hearing about him. He was an 8, and they were written for the John Wayne persona. So again, you cannot see anybody else but an 8 in those roles. And I don't know about Sofia Coppola. I don't know enough about her. I had always imagined her as a 4 based on Lost in Translation, but something about it, this movie seemed kind of 7-ish, right? With a 7-ish heart. And I don't know about Kirsten Dunst, but she captured that really well also. So I think this was just a great example where these things lined up, this vision of the character, the script, and the actress to really be indelible. And so, and we're going to come back to this in a moment, but what if you had stuck in, I could see, for example, maybe sticking in a Zendaya, right, to this character, even though she's often plays a more 5-ish character. I could see her doing this, right? But not Scarlett Johansson, right?
Not Cameron Diaz.
No, for sure, right? For sure. Yeah, and not Margot Robbie even would have been a very different character. So, it's a great point. Let's see. I'm trying to look for what else is, again, just everything about this movie was preserving 7, from the luxuriating in bed, right? I just love being in bed kind of thing. And I enjoy, having treats while I'm in bed. And I enjoy kind of playing dress up in my home, but not necessarily wanting to take on the responsibility to do the whole dress up thing once I go out, But once I do go, to your earlier point about the costume ball, hey man, I've put in all the time and energy to get dressed up and to do this. I'm going to suck the most pleasure out of it that I can. right? But I don't know so much about that experience, but I think that getting Marie Antoinette to attend a lot of those things would have been a big ask.
Yeah,
frankly.
I think she would have had a different attitude if Louis was a compulsive party goer and
Yes.
had one event to go to night after night after night after night. Then she would probably be pulling the other direction. But he was even more of a homebody than her.
Right. So a few things that we will come back to here. Number one, types of the other characters. What would have been like if a transmitting or navigating 7 had played this character, and who are some other preserving 7s that we see. But there's one more thing I want to go back to, and we've touched on it a little bit. It is that zone of inner conflict for preserving. As we've talked about, there's a lot of navigating going on here. There's a lot of gossip happening in the background, and it's almost like it's background noise, right? I mean, it's literally like, who's talking? I'm thinking, who's talking? And I can hardly hear it. And so there's this chatter happening all the time. And to the point you made earlier, TJ, Ingrassia, she's kind of impervious to it almost, right? There are times when she tunes in because she wants to make sure she's playing the game and so forth, but this just isn't that interesting to me. I'd rather go do something more preserving, quite frankly. So it really does capture that inner conflict for preservers around the navigating domain, even what her role is supposed to be, right? I mean, so much of the movie is about her living up to the responsibilities of her role and struggling with, how do I do this? How do I be this wife? How do I become a mother? How do I, live in this world that I don't understand anything about? And it's easy to just tune out of it, right? To just retreat from it where it's safer. And this is something we see in preservers.
A few more navigating things. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of gossip in this movie. There's a lot of just snatches of conversation about her being barren. That's almost always the subject of the gossip, is she hasn't gotten pregnant yet. Somebody even mentions that to her at the masked ball, not realizing she's Marie Antoinette. There's a lot of protocol. So a lot like in Pride and Prejudice, a lot of curtsying happens in this movie. And the social rankings are very clearly defined and codified. Who's who, where are you on the ladder, and remember that, and don't try to act outside of that.
Yeah. Okay, so we will move on now. What would this have been like had it been a transmitting 7 playing this character?
Harley Quinn is consummating her marriage, whether her husband likes it or not. She's getting pregnant that night, and it's happening.
Yeah, would not have had to go through the whole lock and key explanation that happens later in the movie, right? Yeah.
Or she would have taken on many, many lovers. She would have, I think, made a lot more of her position as queen, holding court, maybe even inciting wars of conquest, lording her rank over the nobility, clashing with powerful people and institutions. Or maybe she would have drowned in all the excess, or maybe she would have tried to take on the revolutionaries head on and lost. She would have had a much bigger life than we see in this movie.
There would have been a lot more wow factor, right? Of look at this bed sort of thing. Look at these drapes. Look at this food sort of thing. There would have been this exuberance that we didn't quite see in Marie here. There was another point too I was going to make. You never really get the feeling that Marie Antoinette loves the dress-up thing, right? There was the scenes, kind of the pretty woman scenes of her trying on clothes and all that sort of thing, but it wasn't this kind of, man, I am going to knock them out at the ball tonight sort of thing, which a transmitter would have been more like. I think this would have been a Baz Luhrmann movie had it been a transmitting 7 character.
Hard pass.
Oh boy, you have no idea. So,
hey, I like Baz Luhrmann, you assholes.
And that doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it's a pretty strong data point. So, No, I'm kidding. I'm just not a big Baz Luhrmann fan. All right. So how about a navigating 7? What would this have been?
I think a navigating 7 would have had a more active role in statecraft. I think they would have had, even though they're subordinate to the king or the prince, a navigating 7 as the queen or as the heir to the throne would have been building up alliances or shoring up alliances, rooting out enemies, even if they're doing it outside of official channels. I think she would have been more active in building relationships to ensure her position at court, and maybe would have tried to broker peace with the revolutionaries.
Yeah, I agree. And she would have been more attuned to what the rumors were about her, right?
Yeah, she would have actively sought out and participated in the gossip. And
yes, and also managed her brand a little bit better, right? When people, the people are saying you do this and you do that, and she was like, it doesn't matter what they say. It's not true. That's ridiculous, kind of thing. All right, good. Yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. Let's talk about some of the other characters here. I guess the Jason Schwartzman character, Louis, the Dauphin. Thoughts on his type?
seemed pretty 5-ish to me. Any objections to that?
I was leaning a bit toward 5 as well.
I mean, he's laying in bed with his new wife, their marriage unconsummated, and he's, laughing to himself about this book about locks and keys. He goes off and it seems like he has 2 interests, locksmithing and hunting with packs of dogs. Not much interest in anything else.
Yeah. Not to suggest that 5s don't like sex or are not interested in sex, but it was not top priority for Louis. TJ Dawe?
I was leaning more towards 9. I totally see the validity in 5, but there's a certain kind of gentleness to him, almost a simpleton quality. Again, I'm not saying 9s are not intelligent, but he didn't have the sharpness that I often see with 5s.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, and I think that's a valid point. He struck me as kind of a I don't know how I could put this. It's not going to insult somebody. He struck me as having the temperament of a kind of navigating 5, but who was not particularly, he wasn't really navigating, right? He was just comfortable in his small little world.
So then what would differentiate him? Why would he not be a preserving 5 then? What was different there for you?
So I think his affect was not quite because of that softness that TJ is talking about, but everything else to me pointed to preserving 5, right? I mean, that just obsessiveness over a topic. This is something that you can see in 5s, but he struck me as being somebody who was just in his own world. And 9s usually at least, put on the effort of kind of being personable and connecting to people, whereas he just didn't seem to have that capacity as far as I was concerned. Not a clearly drawn character. Could have gone either 9 or 5. For me, it was 60-40, 5 versus 9. But, all right. Anybody else stand out as having a defined Enneagram type?
Well, Rip Torn, what do you think about him?
It's hard to see Rip Torn as anything other than an 8 in my experience. Yeah, and this one seemed less different. Look, it did not care about the rules of protocol in the court, right? I mean, I want to have my mistress here in the court. I don't care what you want. It brings me pleasure. That's fine. Also, his comment, I think one of his first comments, it was, "How's her bosom?" Right? That's always the first thing I look at. Yeah, that struck me as 8-ish. Thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen Rip Torn be anything other than a fiery 8, and I don't think I ever will.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, particularly because he's dead, so I don't.
Exactly.
The supply is limited at this point.
Maybe in the Heaven Hedgerow Theater, he's stretching out a little bit. I don't know, but
probably not.
All right, good. good.
Another character, the Judy Davis character, the Countess of Noailles, seemed pretty one-ish to me. One of the advisors to the Queen. Very, very set on what the proper protocol is, and very much a one-ish affect of like stiff and formal, deferential, because that is what's required. But like, clearly some disapproval there that she's not voicing, but it's just there in her face and body.
There's a right way to do things, and this is how we do them.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, she was the protocol enforcer, right, throughout the movie, I thought. The only other character that sort of stood out to me was the mistress, the king's mistress, Dubarry. I'd also kind of go with 8 for her, seemed to me. I don't know, any thoughts from you guys?
That makes sense. Could be a 7, but we don't get much of a window into her life. Like, she's a pretty minor character.
Yeah. Seems pretty. She's defiant, I would say, is her main affect.
Yeah, in fact, she bumped Marie Antoinette as they were walking in the halls. Right? I mean, that's pretty darn ballsy, right? To bump to shoulder bump the queen to be.
And then one more character, Florimond Claude, played by Steve Coogan.
Oh, yeah, good. What do you think
3
he was?
was my best guess, and this isn't like I'd take that to the bank, but it's like he's always appropriate and proper, and knows his place and knows what's going on and advises her wisely, and he's dressed just right and he functions just right and fits in this world, like he's just very smooth in this system. Yeah, probably a navigating 3, I would think. All right, good. Yeah, good call. Other preserving 7s, and I got to admit, I don't have much of a list here. For me, they're not a common character that we see. One that jumps to mind, we talked about in a different movie, is the Hugh Grant character in About a Boy, which I am still a huge fan of. And if you have not seen About a Boy, please go and watch it and then listen to our episode on that movie. Anything else come to mind? Well, there's a podcast episode specifically on Castaway, the Tom Hanks character in that. Preserving 7. I have not seen the show, but Mary, you mentioned this once. The Melissa McCarthy character on Gilmore Girls. Yeah, I think so, right? So it's funny because apparently it's back in the mix on the TV shows. So my wife's been watching it as background sound again. Yeah, and because I was wondering about that, because she has a very strong affect, but she's not transmitting. So I think she's preserving 7. Suki St. James, yeah. Yes, yeah. Let's see, another one. Well, we considered doing this movie, and so I watched the movie again. I hadn't seen it since it was in the theater, but Private Benjamin with Goldie Hawn. And absolutely, that was a good call on your part, TJ Dawe. Very much a preserving 7 character. I think it's really well on display there. The only reason I didn't pick that is because I just didn't like the movie as much. I think, I mean, it pained, the idea of watching it a second time kind of pained me. It was just, it's all right. So, but anyway, good characterization of a preserving 7. Another one on the list is Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. His famous song, one of the conventions of musical theater is what's called an I want song. So the protagonist sings a song where they basically say, this is what I want in my life. And what I want candy. What does Tevye want? Yeah. He wants to be a rich man. And what would he do with all his riches? He'd build a big house, and he'd have all the time to discuss the scriptures with the local clergy. And he would just revel in his life of ease. He doesn't want to be powerful. He doesn't want to have 10,000 mistresses or descendants. Just wants comfort and joy. So it seems a pretty 7-ish character to me. Holly Golightly. Have not seen it. Okay. Oh, you would love it, given how much you loathe musicals. Okay. I think it's really well done. I think it's an exceptional musical. And I say this as somebody who does not care for musicals, but I would not insist that you or anybody watch it. Yeah. I'm waiting for the Baz Luhrmann version to come out. Something that we've talked about just on a Facebook discussion, the Banshees of Inisherin, the Colin Farrell character in that. Yeah. Another one I got on my list is I don't know if either of you have seen the cinematic masterpiece that is Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it.
I've seen clips.
It is hysterically funny, and Bill Hader plays an inventor. Love it. I think Aziz Ansari is preserving 7 in real life, and I think his characters both in Parks and Rec and Master of None are very much that. Homer Simpson in The Simpsons, and Audrey Hepburn's character in Breakfast at Tiffany's.
You mentioned Bill Hader, and it made me think of the series Barry. And I'm starting to think that might have been a preserving 7 character.
Oh, interesting.
I'd have to give it some thought and go back to it. But again, he was, kind of 7-ish and had that kind of obsessive, attraction to the actress. Again, it was that, and it was not in this kind of hot transmitting way that we talk about the difference between transmitting relationships and preserving relationships. So I think that he saw her as something more of a anchor almost, even though she was not a particularly stable character himself, but he idolized the relationship, I think, as a way of anchoring his life. Just speculation. I'd have to go back and watch it, but it's an intriguing thought. All right. Okay, well, this was fun, as we have to say about discussing 7 movies, but no matter what type we were talking about, this was a fun conversation. And again, I'll thank you guys for inspiring me to watch this movie, because again, I probably would have never seen it had we not done it for the podcast, and I think it's a really worth watching movie if you haven't seen it. So, final thoughts, guys, before we wrap up.
On from the 7s.
On from the 7s. Thank goodness. I'm exhausted from talking about 7. So we have completed the 7s. I'm going to see if our listeners can figure out where we're going next. Okay, so we won't say anything. But listeners, you can find us on YouTube. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And so also, if you have not done so yet, tune into the Awareness to Action Enneagram podcast, which is a nice supplement or a nice pairing with this podcast. Guys, we'll see you next time.